Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Overwatch League Fan Thoughts and Analysis. We're back, baby. The break is now almost over. This week, the Overwatch League returns for Stage 3, Week 1. Obviously, I don't have any picks to go over from last week because I went over all of the picks from the end of Stage 2 in my Stage 2 playoff video, but I will just say that I did pick the San Francisco Shock to win Stage 2 over the Vancouver Titans, but I also didn't pick New York or the Spark to win, but that doesn't matter. Um, yeah, so San Francisco Shock winning Stage 2 makes for a very fun and interesting rivalry there between those two teams, but let's just jump straight into Stage 3. Um, First, I want to say that when I'm recording this video, there has been no reveal of any of the maps or any of what the meta is going to be or the patch that they're going to use. I'm under the impression that it's going to be just the most recent patch that has hit the game. That's my guess, and that is the guess that I'm going to run with for the foreseeable future. For those of you who don't know what patch that is, and you're curious what patch that is, it's obviously the one that went live with the Archives event, the most recent event, or not Archives, anniversary, um, which also had the workshop in it. But for hero updates, it just had Baptiste and Wrecking Ball, Immortality Field, and Minefield now move with platforms if they land on them. That was the only change there. There were a couple before you had Havana, then you had some other bug fix ones, and then you had the one with Archives that had a Junkrat buff and a Reaper buff and some changes to Symmetra, but those are it. That's the only changes we've seen since the end of, or since the start of Stage 2, so nothing really that I expect to see very different going into Stage 3, so it'll probably still be GOATs, and Vancouver and San Francisco will probably still be the best teams in the league, with New York just behind them. Though who knows, New York maybe spent some time in the offseason grinding and getting better, and I'm sure a lot of these other teams improved as well in the off time. So we'll see what happens. But let's get into the picks. 94 and 46, my overall record. Big picks at 23 and 14. Let's hope that I can get some of those up. We're going to start with Thursday, June 6th. The San Francisco Shock take on the Atlanta Reign. The Shock are very good. The Reign, though they beat New York twice, I don't think they're going to beat San Francisco. I just think San Francisco's style is Atlanta's style, but better. And that, to me, screams a Shock victory. Florida Mayhem take on the Seoul Dynasty. I'm taking the Seoul Dynasty. Though they had some struggles there at the end of last stage, I think they need to figure out, of course, this whole roster situation. But I still think they're a better team than the Florida Mayhem. Yes, the Florida Mayhem added Fate, which I think is very helpful to this team because I think that was their biggest weakness, was the main tank position. I still don't think it's quite enough yet for them to be enough to compete with the Seoul Dynasty, so I'm picking the Seoul Dynasty. From a big pick game for Thursday, I am taking the Chengdu Hunters over the Guangzhou Charge. Both teams are teams that I'm not incredibly confident in as a whole, but I think the Chengdu Hunters have looked better as of late. So I'm taking them over the Charge, who I think have been really struggling after their pretty solid Stage 1. Going 1-5 in Stage 2. So not in a great spot for the Charge. Or no, they went 2-5 because they were 3-4. Anyway, Charge are gonna be in a bit of a rough spot, I think. So, taking the Hunters. Final game for Thursday, I'm picking the Shanghai Dragons over the LA Valiant. I like the LA Valiant. I like what they've done to change the team, but I think that the Shanghai Dragons are much better. I think the Shanghai Dragons are a very solid team. I think they're on the rise. They were the first team to take a map from San Francisco in Stage 2. They did it in Stage 2 playoffs, but they were the first team to do it. I think San Francisco, with how dominant they were, and the fact that Shanghai was the first team to be able to take a map when Shock played some other pretty good teams, it shows you how good the Dragons are. So I'm taking the Dragons over the Valiant. I don't think it's a very close match. Dragons are winning this one easy, I think. Moving on to Friday, June 7th, the Paris Eternal against the Toronto Defiant. That is going to be a very interesting match. I believe the Paris Eternal won the last time these two teams met, because the Toronto Defiant really looked bad for parts of Stage 2, but I think they looked much better at the end when they started making some changes to who they played where. So I'm taking the Toronto Defiant. I still think overall they're a better team than the Paris Eternal. Yes, they've had some changes to their roster. They lost a player in Asher. They signed two other players, but I think the Toronto Defiant is really a better team. So I'm taking them. Next, we have the London Spitfire taking on the Boston Uprising. I am taking the London Spitfire. I still think the London Spitfire are a very solid team, a very good team, regardless of the fact that they lost to the Hangzhou Spark. I think the Hangzhou Spark have been a much better team and a much improved team. And I think the Spark are one of the teams that are very threatening, even though they don't have the best record right now. They beat a very good London team. And while I also think Boston's a very solid team, I think London is just better. They looked so good in Stage 2. They are really, really, really dominating a lot of the games they're playing now. And I'm really excited to see more of London doing well. Obviously, they were the Season 1 champions. There's always a fight in London. So I'm taking London over Boston. Next is the Houston Outlaws against the New York Excelsior. That is an easy pick for me. NYXL over Houston. Houston, arguably the worst team in the league right now. NYXL, one of the top three teams in almost everyone's eyes. And in standings, they're one of the top three teams. You can't really say much more than that. One team is very, very good and very dominant. One team is really struggling. Pretty obvious if you ask me. Finally, for my big pick game for Friday, the Gladiators taking on the Fuel. I am taking the Gladiators. I have been more impressed with the Gladiators than I have been with the Fuel. And I think the Gladiators in general are a better team with more talent than the Fuel are. So I'm taking the Gladiators for that reason. Next, we go to Saturday, June 8th. Hangzhou Spark taking on the Philadelphia Fusion. Spark Shock, man, those names are too similar. I'm taking the Spark over the Fusion. Fusion have been just, I think, mediocre for the past stage. I mean, they didn't really do anything. They didn't really not do anything, but they just weren't all that impressive. They were 3-4. They're in a weird position where I think Goats is really not the meta for them, but they're still just kind of trying and still competing and still trying to be a competitive team. But I think they're struggling a little bit. But I still think the Fusion are a good team. But I love the Spark right now. I think the Spark are playing incredible Overwatch, and I really want to see more from them because I think it will be a really fun team to watch as the season progresses. Next are the Vancouver Titans taking on the Atlanta Reign. I am picking the Titans over the Reign. The Reign are having a rough first week playing the Shock and then the Titans, but you gotta play. And I just think the Vancouver Titans are much better than the Reign are. Another Reign beat New York. And once again, I think the Titans play a more similar style to Atlanta, and I think it's a lot harder to beat a team when you play a similar style to them. And one team plays it a lot better than you. Next, the Seoul Dynasty take on the Guangzhou Charge. I'm taking the Seoul Dynasty. I like the Dynasty, regardless of how much they struggle in some of these more recent weeks. I still think they're a much better team than the Charge, and I'm taking the Dynasty for that reason. Finally, I have my big pick game for Saturday. The LA Valiant against the Chengdu Hunters. This is a tough one for me to pick because obviously the LA Valiant won the last time these two teams played. and I had picked Chengdu, but I said, I can see the Valiant winning this game. I think they're, improving, and I don't think the Hunters are all that great. And in that way, I was correct, even though I didn't pick the Valiant. And originally, I picked the Valiant again because they beat the Hunters, and to me, that's enough. That's the thing of me saying the Valiant are legit, they're real, they can take care of this. But I went back and I picked the Hunters instead, and it comes down to the fact that the Valiant roster just had a major overhaul. You add Fact Fiction as your new main tank. You add McGravy for some help, and you add their DPS player who I can't remember, but I'll figure it out here in a second. But you add some of these new players. Shax, that's it. I thought that was his name, but I wasn't positive. But you add some of these new players who have not played against Chengdu, who is a very weird team. Even if you don't play Fact Fiction at main tank, or even if you don't play Shax at DPS, at main tank you're gonna have to play Kuki, who hasn't played against the Chengdu Hunters either. Um, your main tank is one of your most important positions, and whoever's playing main tank for this Valiant team is never going to have played against the Hunters. Now, they can watch a lot of footage, they can get an idea about it, but it was a very close series, and these two teams played the last time around, and the Valiant ended up getting the win. This time around, with the changes to the Valiant roster, as much as I think the Valiant are a good team and they've had time to develop some chemistry, obviously the acquisition and the trade took place during Stage 2 playoffs, so it's been like 3 weeks that they've had of time to kind of develop that chemistry. I still think the Hunters obviously have had more time, and now they have Jakirin, I don't know how you pronounce his name, in that main tank role. So if they want to move away from that weird stuff that they usually run, they can start to do that more. I don't think they will. I think they know they're popular, and they probably won't. But I'm going to pick the Hunters, as much as it pains me, because I'd much rather pick the Valiant, because I love the Valiant, and I think they're a really fun team to watch grow and develop so far this season. But I just think the changes they made to their roster, to me, makes it more likely that the Hunters get the win. Moving on to Sunday, June 9th. First game of the day is my big pick game, which is the New York Excelsior taking on the London Spitfire, their first matchup of the season. I am picking the New York Excelsior, though this is a game I really could see going either way, depending on who's playing better. Obviously, London won the Atlantic Division last stage. New York won it in the first stage, but they haven't played yet. So this will really be kind of the sign of which team in the Atlantic Division is really on top. Is it New York? Is it London? We'll find out. But I think New York right now is still the better team. They beat the Gladiators in the playoffs, who I think are a better team than the Spark, though I do think the Spark are a very solid team. Spitfire lost to the Spark. Right now, I think New York, though they did lose their last two regular season matches against Atlanta, I still think they look overall better than London does. Next is the Paris Eternal against the Boston Uprising. I'm taking the Boston Uprising. I'm still impressed with the way the Boston Uprising have played this season. I still think they're a very solid team. I love watching them play. I love what they bring to the table. Boston Uprising, they are my winners for this match, especially with Fusions saying that he believes they're a top 5 team if they were to put in their maximum effort. So maybe we'll see some of that maximum effort. Next, we have the Washington Justice taking on the Dallas Fuel. I'm picking the Dallas Fuel because the Washington Justice aren't that great of a team. Even though it's the only match they play the first week of Stage 3, I still don't expect them to beat a very good Dallas Fuel team. Final game of the week is the Vancouver Titans against the LA Gladiators. I was very close to making this one my big pick game. This is going to be a really good game. We have 2 games on the same day that are both incredible, but I just think New York and London are a little bit closer together in skill than the Titans and the Gladiators are. And that's nothing against the Gladiators. It's just the Titans are that good. But I'm picking the Titans against the Gladiators because it's the Titans. But this is the game where I think if the Titans are going to lose their first game of the season, this is it. Obviously, excluding the Stage 2 playoffs. Stage 2 finals loss to the Shock. This is the game that if they're going to lose a game, this is the one. This is the Gladiators' best chance to beat the Titans, I think. I don't think they've played yet. I think it's their first time playing, but this is the best chance that the Gladiators will get to beat the Titans. I think this is the best team the Titans will play for a little while until they play the Shock again. I don't think they play New York until stage 4. So this is going to be a very good game. I would love to see the Gladiators walk away with it. Um, I always like to see upsets unless it's against my team. But upsets are always nice to see, I think. So I definitely think this will be a very, very good match, very close match. But ultimately, I think that the Vancouver Titans are just so good. They're so strong. I see them walking away from this one with victory. But like I said, I could see this one going anyway, really. I do think it's going to be that close between these teams, potentially. But let's look at my favorite thing, the overall division standings, the league standings, as they are. And you can see that the top teams in each division are still Vancouver and New York. That has not changed, and that won't change for a little while, probably. But yeah, so those are our two teams. But London and San Francisco right behind them. Those are the 4 teams that are probably the top 4 teams in the league right now. Though I guess you could make an argument that maybe the Spark or the Gladiators are right up there, and maybe even the Fuel if you really think that. But I think right now those are probably your top 4, the top 4 by standings. So that's what you're looking at there. The interesting ones, of course, are you look at the Pacific Division. The Pacific Division is stacked. You look at the Titans, the Shock, the Gladiators, the Fuel, the Spark, the Dynasty, the Dragons. Those are all teams that I think are very good. And this is something I talked about before the season began. I thought the Pacific Division looked a lot better than the Atlantic Division. In Stage 1, it didn't look that way. The Atlantic Division was much more solid. You had New York, you had Philadelphia, you had Atlanta, you had Toronto, and you had Boston all in Stage 1 playoffs. You move into the Stage 2 playoffs, completely different script. You have Vancouver, you have San Francisco, you have the Gladiators, you have Dallas, you have Hangzhou, and you have Shanghai in the Stage 2 playoffs. You have 2 Atlantic teams in the Stage 2 playoffs with New York and London. So it is completely flipped. The Pacific Division looks so much better than the Atlantic Division does right now. And it's still close. Technically by standings, you have Atlanta at 7-7 plus 3. They're ahead of Shanghai. They're only 2 map differential behind the Dynasty. They're a game behind the Spark, with better differential too. The Defiant are ahead of the Dragons. The Uprising are ahead of the Dragons. The Dragons have had some rough go and whatnot, but I think the standings really reflect what has been going on somewhat inaccurately, because the Pacific Division right now is just so much better than the Atlantic. Even the number 3 team in the Atlantic is Philadelphia, and I wouldn't even pick Philadelphia against Shanghai or Seoul or Hangzhou, or Dallas. They already played Dallas and lost, but it's so one-sided, I think, right now with the Pacific Division, just so much better, which wasn't the case last season. Last season, the Pacific Division was kind of a laughingstock for a little while. The first 2 stage playoffs were all Atlantic teams. You had New York and London in both of them. You had Houston in the first one. You had Philadelphia in the second one. Stage 3, you bring in the 2 LA teams. They both make it. But you still had New York and Boston. They were the top 2 teams, and they were the 2 teams that played in the Stage 3 finals. You get to Stage 4, and you have 3 Pacific teams, both LA teams, and then Dallas, and then you have New York, who then, of course, lost to the Valiant in the Stage 4 finals. So there's been this gradual shift from the Atlantic Division to the Pacific Division, from even last season going into this season. And we see it now, like it's really prominent now how good the Pacific Division is. And the Atlantic Division is just 2 teams that are good and are very good, and they're solid, strong teams. And the rest are mediocre to bad. 2 of the worst teams in the league are in the Atlantic, and the Mayhem and the Justice. 3 of the worst teams in the league with the Outlaws as well. I think you could say those are the 3 worst teams, and I'd agree with you. The Charge are, the Charge and the Valiant are also not great teams, but I think the two of them are both better than the Outlaws and the Justice and the Mayhem. And even possibly the Eternal. I think the Eternal are struggling a bit. The Valiant, I think you could make an argument, are better than the Eternal. So you see how crazy it is, how one sided I think the league is towards the Pacific Division, and it's really fun to watch in a way, um, because it could always shift again. Um, if the meta somehow changes going into stage 4, you could see a radical shift back towards the Atlantic if maybe the DPS compositions become more popular, and then you start seeing teams like Philadelphia with Carpe and EQA who dominated in stage or in season 1 because it was a DPS heavy meta for most of the season. Um, you could see them make a resurgence because they're very good and they're very strong players at that, but they're not great in a team based, goats composition, but they're really good in a skill based composition. And who knows what could happen if we see a shift. I'm really excited to see what happens. But right now, I would say the Pacific Division definitely has the better end on that regard, or in that regard. But that's everything I have for you. No top 10 stage standings yet because we haven't had any top 10 standings to discuss yet because there haven't been any games yet for this stage. But I would love to know what you think about the divisional differences between Pacific and Atlantic. If you think I'm crazy and you think there's not this massive divide in terms of skill between the Pacific and the Atlantic, maybe you think I'm crazy and you think that it's much closer than I'm making it out to seem. But I personally think, you got 10 teams in each, and 7 of the teams in the Pacific are really good. 6 of the 10 made the stage playoffs in stage 2. It's crazy. It's crazy. But yeah, that's everything I have for you. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, consider liking and subscribing. If you want more content like this in the future, of course, that's the best way to get it. But I'm going to get out of here. So once again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.